Hello, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. How is everyone's morning going? Stormy, packing, so anxious. Oh no. I'm sorry to hear that. We're going to be mixing water. We're going to do kind of a color mixing class today. Are you packing because it's stormy? Or are they unrelated? Oops. So yeah, today we've got a few minutes. What I'd like to see in the comments right now is if you have specific questions about mixing colors, because that's what we're going to be doing today, is talking about mixing up colors. And we might do some color matching, that kind of a thing, but if you've got requests for what you'd like to see me demonstrate today, I would be happy to answer questions. So go ahead and place those in the comments now. Vacation this week. Oh, I always get kind of anxious before vacation, especially when it's like all the last minute little things you have to get done. Are you going anywhere fun? So this palette I have here is mine. It's the unicorn food one, although I'll probably demonstrate a little on this, and I'll demonstrate on some other ones, and maybe some tube paints too. I do sell these, although I'm almost out of these. I'm working on reordering a new set, and I'm changing it up just a little bit, but yeah, we usually use a couple different things in class so everybody can demonstrate. So yeah, we're going to be doing color mixing today. We've got brown for trees. Let me take some notes. Yeah, we'll definitely do some brown colors. And we'll do brown and beige colors for skin tones too, because I got several questions recently about skin tones. So we're going to kind of talk through how to do that. Does anybody want a general color overview? Like, how many of you need the beginning overview of color and the primaries and secondaries and things like that, as well as some like hue and tone and shade and that kind of thing? So we're not going to be painting anything specifically today. We're just going to be learning about mixing colors. Okay, and we're going to start with a general overview. Perfect. Yeah, so we'll talk about, there's also questions on animals, which, perfect, because we're already going to be doing some brown type things. Perfect. All right. It is 11, so let's actually get started. For those of you who are unaware, my name is Lacey. I am the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and we do live watercolors here on TikTok, or live watercolor classes every other week, except for it is watercolor month, so I've been doing something pretty much every week. Every other week it seems like I'm doing something with Andrea so that we can kind of show you two different ways or answer questions, but we're celebrating watercolor month, and today we're going to be talking about color. mixing color. I'll demonstrate with some tubes. I'll demonstrate with some dried pans. And then we're also going to go over a little bit about color in general. All right, so let's get started. In general, let's start with a few definitions. So when we're talking about a hue, every once in a while, you'll just hear it called to as like the color, but the hue of it is what is the color in the pan? So if I put this directly on the paper, that would be something like that, and that would be its hue. So what is its hue or the general color of it without any sort of changes to it? As in its most saturated format. Because then we're going to be talking about tint. And this is where we vary a little bit from something like acrylic or oil painting, where with tint you would add more and more white to it, but with watercolor you just add more and more water so that the color shows through. So when we talk about a tint, we're talking about how light or how saturated that pigment is, or the hue. Shade, on the other hand, is adding more and more black to something. So you can see kind of in between, and that's the difference between tint and shade. All right, there was a question about the warm versus cool. And let me actually, I thought I had my color wheel. Here it is. If you actually take a look at a color wheel, and this is the one that I have in my studio, if you're really, really interested in color, color.nerd on TikTok has a really interesting color wheel as well, and he has a lot of really interesting thoughts on color. But this is kind of the basics that people understand. So if we take a look at this wheel, if we were to cut warm and cool colors straight across, we would kind of cut them around here, because all the blues, or maybe even here, yeah, actually about here, because that still has a little bit of blue in it. All of the blues are going to be on the cool side, and the yellows and the reds are going to be on the warm side. Now, just because something is strictly mainly on the warm side or on the cool side doesn't actually mean that it has to strictly be warm or cool, because when we look at things, like let's take a look at this yellow here. This yellow here is technically on the warm side of the color wheel, but it has more greens. It's got more kind of greens and blue tints in it, so it would be a much cooler yellow than something like a yellow orange. And the same thing with a yellow orange is technically cooler than something like a red orange. So you want to kind of keep in mind about that. Same thing over here. Everything is going to be relative. So something like a blue is the true coolness. This is going to be warmer. This is going to be a cooler color. So when we take a look here, we can go from cool to warm by adding more and more red or more and more blue or something that's kind of on one of those sides. Now, if you guys want to actually, we can paint these color wheels together. Sometimes that's helpful. Maybe we'll actually do a color wheel together, although I want to talk about one thing first, because sometimes people, when they see these color wheels, you know, I was taught in school that red, yellow, and blue are the primary colors, and they're the colors that make every other color. However, in my actual painting, and you've probably noticed this on a printer, but the primaries that they use are magenta, which is kind of a pinkish color, a yellow, and then a cyan, or more like a phthalo blue that has a little bit of kind of, it doesn't quite have greens in it, but it's not like a deeper blue color. So this is actually my preferred method, but not every set comes with a nice pinky color in it, so we can actually show both. Let's make a color wheel together. What do you guys want me to show? Do you want me to do red, yellow, blue, or magenta, yellow, and quote-unquote cyan? Hello to Ohio. Got 3 for magenta. I want to do one color wheel, although I will be talking about these 3 colors and how they affect when we mix up colors differently. So let me actually find an empty page in this sketchbook. This is not a fancy sketchbook. This isn't even actually watercolor paper. If you're going to be practicing today, you can use whatever. This is just a mixed media paper. It doesn't need to be great painting paper. I just want to be able to show you the colors. So actually, let's start on this side here. And I'm going to find something round so that I can trace around it so I can make it somewhat of a circle. So I'm just going to trace around this. Yep. Not exactly a circle. And I'm going to kind of define where I want these different colors. Let's put our yellow here. Let's put our magenta here. And let's put our blue or cyan type color right over here. We want to kind of place these about equally apart. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to make a little stripe of each of these colors in here, just the natural pigment on its own, and then we'll make another stripe in between here to get our secondary colors where we mix these kind of in equal parts, and then we'll mix these 2 colors to get our tertiary colors. You'll see how this works in just a second. So I have varying opinions on, I'm going to try to put this here to give us some contrast, so maybe this will focus a little bit better. Beginner palettes, it really depends. I personally like to make sure there is a nice yellow in it. If you're working with pans, go ahead and pre-wet your colors now so that you'll actually have access to some of them. I personally like to make sure there is a medium yellow, some sort of a vermilion, a pinky color, even over a red, a nice bright yellow-green color, and then some blues. That will get you pretty much everywhere you need to be. It's also nice to have something like a burnt sienna and maybe a burnt umber. Also, if you start with a limited palette, it'll teach you how to mix colors. This is not to say that you can't have a big colorful palette and just dip straight into any color. This will help you understand the colors a lot better if you start with smaller amounts of colors, so that one, you can get better quality because you'll be purchasing less, but you can get a higher quality of them. And then it'll help you understand maybe why you're reaching for certain colors or why you would want a specialty color in the future. All right, so let's actually just start with a nice stripe. I've pre-wet my pans, so they're gonna be pretty much activated at this point, and I'm just gonna go straight into this yellow. And I'm gonna make a little stripe here. This is not gonna be a very pretty color wheel, but it is going to be a color wheel. Then in my blue, because we're doing a cyan, wait, note that, hurry up. I'm gonna put it in heavy quotes though. If you have a phthalo blue or a cerulean blue, that would actually be a better type of cyan than something like an ultramarine. So in my palette, I have what I call blue raspberry, which is kind of like a phthalo blue. So I'm going to take a little of that, and I'm going to put my blue stripe here. I'm going to try not to touch those in the middle so they don't all bleed together for now. And then for my magenta, I'm going to take this pink color here. Something as close to a pink as you have. Somebody earlier in the comments said they were having trouble with pinks. And if you're trying to mix up pinks, they are very hard to mix up in pretty much any color. Yes, you can add white to red, but you're going to get kind of Pepto-Bismol pinks. And that's why I always say I like to have a beginner set that actually has a pink, because it's one of those colors that you can't really mix very well. Okay. Now, let's talk about secondary colors. These are called primaries. Those are the primary colors because you can't really mix a true yellow or a true blue. You kind of have to have those pigments to have them. You can't actually mix 2 other colors to get a true blue. Yes, you can get shades of blue by mixing a couple different colors together, but you can't get a really true blue, yellow, or a pinkish color on their own. The secondary ones are where we're going to mix about equal parts of the other little slices in between. So let's start, since I already have some blue here, I'm going to take some of that. And I'm going to grab a little bit of this pink color. And I'm going to put that here. So here is my secondary color. This is right in between the two. This is a nice purple color. And I also want to take a second, because we were talking about the differences between the two different primaries, the cyan, magenta, and yellow, and then red, green, or sorry, red, yellow, and blue. And here is why I prefer this set, because you can get more true colors using that pink, especially the orange and this. Because if I were to take something like this red, and I were to mix it with the more neutral blue color, I am going to get a purple, but it's more of kind of a mauve-y type color. It's not quite the same. It's not as vibrant. So I think you can get more vibrancy when you're mixing with this set of primaries if you want to mix with a limited color palette. This one was bubblegum. Thank you for the question. So this is a size 12 round brush. Although in some brands it's closer to a size 10. It's kind of like a lot of art brands are kind of like women's sizing in jeans. This one is a 12, but it could be a 10 or kind of one of those in-between sizes. All right, we're going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to take a little bit of this bubblegum color, although I'm going to wash this off because I put some blue on here and I don't want any of that blue getting into this orange color I'm about to try to mix up. And I'm going to take a little of this yellow, trying to mix about equal parts just to get my medium yellow. And I don't have very good saturation there, but it'll work for the demonstration of what we're doing right now. Because I'm trying to work kind of fast. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to add some of this yellow to my blue. And we're going to get kind of a nice bright green color. So now we have our secondary colors, and then anything that falls in between. So let's say we took this purple and let's add a little bit more of this pink in here. In between, this is going to be a tertiary or kind of a third level color. It's going to be the one-step transition between these two. If we added a bunch more of this blue, but still kept some of that pink in there, we're going to get something like this. So just go ahead and fill these in. I'm going to add a little more pink to my orange to get this color here. This is a really messy color wheel, but hey, it's fine. I'm going to add a little more of that yellow in. We're going to get a nice kind of light orange color. And then again, add more yellow into this green to get a lighter green color. And understanding this part of this, I'm going to mix a little of this into the blue here to get a darker green. Understanding this is going to give you kind of a good head start on understanding color, but this is not where this ends at all. And that's a great question. Somebody says, what if you want to get like a darker forest green? This is where we actually need more than to combine more than two colors, potentially. You might be able to just modify a single color you have in your palette using something else, but I want to introduce to you the idea of complements, or the colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel from each other. So complementary colors are things that are directly opposing. I like to think of them as, let's say pink's brightness little indicator looks like this. And directly across from a pink is kind of a green. And let's say that green's brightness indicator looks like this. Well, if we put these together, they're going to make more of a shape like this, something that's not as bright or as sharp. And so the colorful parts in this one and the colorful parts in this one are going to some degree cancel each other out. And depending on how much you mix them together, is going to kind of affect that. So let's talk about complementary colors and let's actually show that. Also notice, complementary colors are also called that because they look nice together. You're going to start to see patterns of colors across from each other in this complement thing, where you're like, oh yeah, Christmas is red and green, or the Broncos are blue and orange, or any sort of sports teams, or Mardi Gras, yellow and purple, that kind of a thing. They look really nice together because they're kind of opposing. Opposites attract. So we are talking about watercolor and we're talking about mixing colors. You want to use shadows, assuming you're meaning for darker skin tones. They look like zombies. So yeah, you'd want to, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. This gets kind of complicated, but let's build this foundation first. So somebody talked about forest green. So we will be making kind of a forest type green using these colors that are here. But this is where we might need to actually think about mixing more than two colors together. So let's start with a base here. So we're going to actually mix about 3 colors together. In order, if I want to use these same 3 colors I started with, I'm going to put some of that blue in. Then I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to grab some of that yellow so that I have a nice green to start. So I have a nice green here. It's kind of a foresty green, but it's still a little bit light, and it doesn't have some of the naturalness that I want. So let's talk about putting its complement, and if we looked at that, it's going to be this pink color over here, its complement color. And let's mix in between here. Let's put in a little bit of this pink into this, just a little bit at a time. And I'm adding more and more water to this, so it's going to get a little more diluted as I mix this, but you'll be able to kind of see that hue between. Let's add in a little more of that pink to this. See how we got more of a foresty kind of feel to that color? And then as we add in more and more of this pink, we're going to get into a gray color, and then eventually we'll kind of pop out the other side and get more towards a magenta. So in order to mix something like a forest green, what I would do, if I didn't have one in my palette, is I would take, this blue color, some of this yellow color, and then some of this pink or a reddish color, and I overshot it a little bit with the pink, because I just needed a little bit. So let's add in a little bit more of both the yellow and that blue color. Let's mix that up. I think this is going to be, this is too blue, but we're close. We're closer to a foresty green. So if we're a little bit too blue, then all we need to do is add in a little bit of that yellow. And that's going to give us more of a nice foresty type green. There is a question about advanced lives in the future. So I'm working on some ideas for more advanced progression, and I am working on a landscape class, but I'm also working on, I don't know, a couple other things. I'm always working on something, but I'm trying. All right, let's demonstrate this one more time. Why don't somebody else tell me a color, not a brown, but a color that you, like, describe a color to me, and let's try to mix it up, seeing how many colors we need to actually make it. And yeah, I totally encourage you just to fill up and play with color. You can even see over here, this is a video I'm going to be working on soon, but I'm going to be talking about layering and messing with color. And sometimes I just paint little random things like that so I can just kind of see how color moves together. It's fun. Let's wait to talk about mixing black colors. You could also mix a green and then add an orange. Yes, that's a good point. There's a ton of different ways to get to something. Okay, we've got a couple for blues that are maybe a little bit more toned down. And let's do that. We're going to do a couple things in this next one. So we're going to make I'm going to call it a muted blue. I don't know if you guys can see what I'm writing here. Am I out of lead? Of course I am. Let me get a pen. So somebody made a good point about could you use different colors to get to the same point? And yes, so let's make a muted blue. I'm going to do it the way where we just need 2 colors, and then let's talk about a different approach to get to basically the same color, because there isn't just one path to get to a color. I'm going to wipe out this little tin here. And I'm going to still be working with these 3 primaries for this. So I'm going to take some of this. I'm almost out of this color. I love this color. So if we started here, this would be the color. This is not a muted blue. So what we need to do in order to mute it, actually let's show this here. So I've got that color here. If I were to take the complement, I would want something like this color here, but I'm going to use where I mix those 2 together to get the orange. Here's where that true color is, kind of over here. It's a little muddy because I still had a little bit of that blue in there. So let's mix a little bit of that into here. And I think this needs a little bit more of that pink because I think I leaned a little too heavily to the yellow side on that. This is going to give us kind of a nice muted blue. So this is kind of like the sky on a cloudy day. So we're going to have this be kind of our middle color that we're going to be using. And then as we add more and more of this, notice, oh, that's not mixed up. Notice how it's going to it's going to get a little bit gray. And then it might turn a little bit green before it starts to move backwards in that way. So we made this color using the 3 primaries, but let's make it using 2 colors. So in this palette, I do have an orange, and then I have that blue. We're actually going to make this color a couple different ways, because there's not one single path. So again, I'm going to start with this color as one. And then let's use this, which I call Marmalade in my palette, which is kind of almost a vermilion type color. And if we were to add in little amounts of this Marmalade color, oh, I added a little too much for my first step. I like to think about mixing colors as kind of sneaking up on them. You want to add in little amounts at a time. So that's actually pretty close to this. If I were to thin this out, I'm going to put a little more water in my brush. You can see it's kind of a similar color. Maybe it needs a little bit more. Yep, we're getting a little closer to that if I were to thin that out. Getting to a very similar color once this one dries down. More and more at a time. Just a little bit, sneaking up on that color. See how we can get so many different colors just using 2 colors? But we can actually do the same thing even using a different blue. We're going to get a slightly different result. Let's try it with this other blue. So here is this blue. Starts off quite different. And let's add the same color here, that orange. And let's mix in a little at a time. I think I've got too much in my brush. A little bit more. A little bit more. You can go through a huge array of things, but let's try to adjust this color here. This is the closest I have, but let's say, okay, I have something like this in my palette here. How would I get to a similar color here? I'm going to take a little bit more of that initial blue we have, and we're a little bit closer, but there is a tiny bit of kind of a green in that because that phthalo blue, so I could come in here and grab a little bit of, say, this green color, and then more of this blue, and maybe even just a little more of that blue, and then let's thin it down, and we're going to be fairly close to that color. It's not exactly the same. I need to adjust a little bit with those, but we can get pretty close to those colors using different colors. So you can actually approach colors differently depending on what colors are in your set. And yeah, if you take the time to do this a few times, you're going to really learn a lot about color, and you're going to be able to adapt based on the colors that you have in your palette. You can make pretty much any color, besides like the pink or the really bright colors. While we're on this page, I'm actually going to show you my favorite way to make something like a Payne's Gray. And we've pretty much already done it. My favorite way to get to a black or a Payne's Gray is to take a phthalo blue or a greenish leaning blue color. I need quite a bit of this to make sure it gets nice and dark. And then something like a vermilion or an orange or a red leaning orange. And when you mix these two together, I need just a little bit more of that orange, just a tiny bit more. I overshot it just a little bit. We're close. I've got more of kind of a brown. Actually, that's pretty good. But Payne's Gray usually has a tiny bit of kind of a blue color to it. Let's put a little bit of that down. And there we go. We've got our Payne's Gray or our black type color. And you can see you can mess with that to make it different. This is a warmer black. This is a cooler black. I have really lost track of the comments. Sorry, guys. Yeah, if it keeps turning brown, you're using a little bit too much. So this is the kind of the rule of sneaking up on a color. So if you're unsure, when you put a color in your brush and you're like, I think I have a little bit, but that's actually quite a bit, you can always use an extra well to kind of just like tap your brush off. And then you could wash your brush, and then you can actually just grab from here to add little amounts in at a time, which will help you make minor adjustments. We have to be very, very sneaky when we are sneaking up on colors. Happy birthday to somebody. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about muting colors in a couple different scenarios. We've talked about Payne's Gray. We've talked about, notice we're kind of sneaking up on talking about some of these brown colors. I'm going to tap these off just because I want to be able to turn the page. And I don't want them to get my desk too much more messy. It's already pretty messy. Oops, sorry, just knocked that. All right, so let's talk about brown colors. If you don't have brown in your palette, or even if you do, let's start. I'm going to start by grabbing this Winsor Newton palette, which has two different brown colors in here. Because let's talk about modifying these different colors. Because unless you have my palette, you might have these colors here. And so we can talk about kind of modifying them, and then let's talk about making them. Okay? This is just a eraser, but somebody gave me a tip in a live a while ago that if I keep something like this on the screen, it will help it focus a little better. So I'm trying to remember to put that there because they said it needs color and contrast. All right, let's see. How can I get this Actually, if I do it over here, then we can maybe see over here as well. And let's put this here so it's a little bit out of the way. All right, I'm gonna wipe out this well. And let's take a look at the colors that we already have in this set as far as brown type colors. Brown is your favorite color. What type of a brown is your favorite color? All right, so in this one, the two browns that I have are, let me move these so I can actually see. This one's actually called like a red, but it's very similar to something kind of like a burnt sienna. I love burnt sienna as a color. They're beautiful. And then this one is close to like an umber. My pans are so dirty I can't really read what they say. And notice if I were to take a little bit of water and kind of thin out this one, you're going to see a lot of reds in it. And this one, you're going to kind of see maybe some almost yellow type colors, yellow undertones. So we're talking about things like trees. Oftentimes we're actually going to be, we'll talk about skin tones in a second, but let's talk about trees because they're maybe a little less complicated. I like to use for shadows blues and purples, so something like this might be a nice tree color. But if I were to mix in a little bit of like this blue, that could make a really nice shadowing effect on something like this. It's also going to help us get towards kind of a gray. A lot of times when you actually look at the bark of a tree, it's not this true brown. This true brown might kind of show through. But the outer skin kind of gets this grayish tint. And so since this is kind of a reddish yellow undertones, if we take some of this blue, it is going to give us more of that gray color into it. So if I were trying to paint something like a tree, which I have not actually done in a really long time, so this is kind of off the cuff, but I might do something like putting a layer of this down first. Let's pretend like this is a really weird trunk here. Okay, really weird trunk. And I might do kind of an under shading kind of thing where I take a little bit of this blue to kind of shade the sides that are going to be more in shadow. Or since we don't have a purple in this, I'm going to have to add some red to this. We could also kind of warm up certain areas. And I would just drop some of these different colors in here. And then what I would do, this is also not watercolor paper, but what I would then do is I would kind of lift from the center in certain areas. And then as this dried along some of these paths, this is where I would want to drop more of these blue type colors to show the shadowing. It'll also create some of that gray texture. This is not working well because this is not watercolor paper, but I think you'll kind of get the idea of like adding in some texture to actually get some texture and some different colors of brown right in there. So yeah, if you've got a brown that's super warm, let's take this burnt sienna or S color. It's kind of a reddish brown color, and let's make it cooler. All right, so we've got this. We already know what that looks like. And then we have a couple different options in this set. We've got, this is like an ultramarine blue. So if I want it to be cooler, I can add some of that in. And it's going to get cooler. Or we could take this color and add something like that Prussian blue to it. Need a little more of that burnt sienna. I went a little too far. And that is actually going to make a much nicer, cooler color to me. This one kind of ends up leaning a little bit more towards purple, whereas with the Prussian blue, because there's a little bit of green in Prussian, just a tiny bit, it's going to kind of help neutralize the red and keep it more towards brown, because brown is basically going to be mixing opposite colors. So let's go ahead and just kind of show this too. I already have a green in here, so let's start with that as a base. We talked about complements. So if we were to take this green here and add a little bit of this red at a time, maybe a little bit of that yellow too, and more red, more of that yellow, red. And remember, we started with a green base, so it's complement. We're going to get a nice kind of brown color. This one's a little more gray, so if I wanted it to be a little bit more warm, I would add more of that red. If I wanted it to be kind of more of a vibrant one, I would maybe add a little yellow. And that's how you can get a whole bunch of different brown colors. While we're talking about brown colors, and we're going to go back to that other palette, we're going to start to kind of talk about skin tones. Now, skin tones are super complicated. That doesn't mean that you can't do them, but what I recommend doing when you are getting ready to paint something like skin tones is do some of these exercises and actually take a look at a whole bunch of different pictures and things and try to figure out what the undertone of skin is. So I am pale, obviously. But if you kind of look in certain areas on my skin, there are some like purpley undertones. And then on other areas, there are more like yellow undertones on my palm. And so depending on where I am painting, we're going to want to have different bases. And this is going to be true for any type of skin tone. You're going to have undertones. We hear this talked about a ton in makeup and things like that. So this might be, maybe a good cheat sheet would be actually to lean kind of on the beauty professionals and take a look at what type of a skin tone your favorite influencer who has a similar skin tone is using for color correction and things like that, because it might give you some hints to what their undertones are if you have a hard time identifying them at first. Now, it's going to be difficult at first if you've never worked with color to know what the undertones of something are, but it comes quickly, I promise. The more you practice this, the more you look at things, the more you're going to be able to realize. And that's going to be really important, especially in those darker skin colors, because no two people are the same color, really. And you can change so much. Somebody mentioned they were getting more like grays. Well, maybe you're getting the grays because you're painting your shadows and your undertones with the complement colors instead of the corresponding color that is the warmth or the deepness of a color. Some of the darker skin tones are really going to lean heavily towards blues. Some are going to have a really nice, rich red base underneath it. So we kind of need to just adjust depending on what that actually is. I should have printed out some pictures, but I did not. So we're just going to have to kind of wing it a little bit. So the clay is just helping keep my camera focused, ideally. And this is a kneaded eraser. Oh, I think I actually might try to go to the pottery studio after this class. I'm super excited. I've got some really cool things that I hope are going to not have cracked. We'll see. Okay, so the way we're going to do this, and the only reason why I'm going to do it this way, is because I'm going to start with a decent amount of water, and so anybody who has a lighter skin tone or is white or has just more of a pale complexion, we're going to do that first because we're going to start and then we're going to add pigment and we're going to work through a whole kind of range of shades and colors, and we're going to be adding more and more pigment as we go, so it's going to get darker and darker as we go. We could start with a whole bunch of pigment and go lighter, but I think we'll be able to see the differences as we go through this if I start with the less saturated versions first, and then we'll work through that. All right, so I'm putting quite a bit of water in here because I'm going to be mixing up a bunch of different colors. Let's start with something very simple. So some people have kind of a peachy undertone or peachy type colors. So let's start with just kind of like, let's take a little bit of some of this yellow here. And then let's take a little bit of this orange and a little bit of this red. And I know this doesn't look like much of anything, but on a skin tone, if you were doing a highlight area, this is actually, I can see this. This is a very light color, but this would, like, if you were painting me, this is what you would need for some of the highlight areas. This is basically nothing, but there's kind of a tint to the color, okay? So we're starting really, really lightly. Now, let's think about somebody like my husband is tanner than I am, and he has more olive undertones. So I would take something instead of like this yellow here for his skin tone, and I would take something that's closer to like a yellow ochre that has a little bit of kind of a green undertone to it. And I would add some of that, maybe a little red. And let's just check on this color here. We're closer, but he is nowhere near that pale. Maybe I am in certain areas. And then I actually would kind of want to take maybe a little bit of purple into this and a little more of this kind of yellow ochre color. So we're getting closer to a skin tone, although I don't have enough pigment in there in general. We're going to work through a bunch of these colors here. So let's keep adding in. Now let's say that the person has darker skin than this, but it has a warmer undertone. We can adjust this as we go through. I'm going to take a little red. And now this is a nice rosy color. This is actually kind of closer to what my actual skin tone is. Again, let's make that a little bit more olive undertones because this one's more of red undertones. Let's take some more of that yellow ochre type color. And let's actually put a little tiny bit of blue, just a tiny bit. I put a little bit too much. Oh, sorry, I don't have this all in focus here. Tiny bit of blue. Now we've got more of an olivey type skin tone again. Maybe you have more yellow undertones, so we would just take a little bit of yellow. Okay, at this point in this, I'm going to stop washing my brush in between. My colors are going to get really messy on the actual thing, but that's because I want to make sure I get the full saturation as I go through. We're probably going to need to go over into this other page. Maybe somebody has a really rosy color to them, so I'm going to take some of this pink. It's a nice warm color, but let's actually make it even rosier. Oh, sprinkled. Nice rosy complexion there. And then I'm going to come back up. Actually, let's flip this over so we can kind of see it kind of go in a direction. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble keeping this in focus here. All right, so we're going a little bit too far to the red tint here, what to be kind of a believable skin color, I guess. This is more like something where somebody might be blushing. So at this point, we might actually want to bring this back down. You can even bring some greens into this. Again, if you're afraid you have too much, you can tap it off. Oh no, I actually did wash my brush again. But by adding a little green into that, now we're back more into kind of the realm of more believable skin tones where it's not so red. This is like somebody huffing and puffing, and this is like a nice kind of tan type color. So if you didn't have a yellow ochre, you would just want to use a green and a yellow, kind of like what we just did here. See, if I even add a little more green to this, we can tone this down even more. This will kind of bring out some of those other colors here. See, we're getting more olives under there, although I had a little drop there, but you can see it's more olive than that one. Purple is also a great addition for if you're unsure of what somebody's undertone, something like a purple is going to be good because it's going to kind of balance between the cool and warm undertones. And it's going to give you nice. I keep washing my brush, and I need to stop so that because I keep lightening this color, and that's not what I want to do. All right, so let's actually make this even more purple. This is going to get us a little bit darker. This is making me think of like milk chocolate right here. This color in here, not on here. See, we got a nice cool undertone here. Again, and we can move back towards a warmer undertone by adding in some of these red type colors. That's a little bit, that's kind of like a blushing area. So let's bring this back with more of this kind of yellow ochre color. Now we're getting more saturation. A little bit. We need to get a lot more saturation to actually truly represent some different skin tones. And with watercolor, you might struggle to get the true, I'm going to add an orange, to get the true actual color on the first layer. It doesn't mean you can't get the true color. It just means that you might need to let one layer dry and then layer another layer on top. And that can be actually another good way to achieve this. Over here, we have this nice brown color. Let's say you started with this lovely brown, and then the more and more you look at the photo, you say, you know, I feel like there are some purpley highlights on their skin. There's some undertones. You could actually come in with a second like wash, a light wash, so lighter than that, something like that. And you can layer that on top, and that will help create some dimension. Once it's dry, this is not quite dry, but that will help create some more dimension. It'll also add some more pigmentation so you can get closer to the shadows and things like that without it getting kind of gray. I don't recommend, if you are painting on a human, I don't recommend using black or Payne's gray to actually achieve those colors. Again, we're getting really close to that kind of red tone. I think I'm going to take a little of this phthalo blue. That might have been a little bit more than I wanted to for this next jump, but we'll at least get a little more pigment in here. This is a little bit more of a grayer type tone because I did go a little bit further than I wanted to. So let's bring it back with a little bit more of this red. Get into a nice color here. Again, I'm going to add in a little green to kind of counteract a little bit of that red color. Doing my best to remember to not wash my brush. It's such an instinct. Look how many different colors we can achieve as we just kind of walk through this. So this is kind of like sneaking up on those colors. So we're going to come back over here because I'm running out of space. I'm going to bring in some of this purple. Somebody asked if I have a color I use as a base for skin tones. I would say, I mean, one, I don't paint people that often. I do paint animals quite a bit that have brown skin furs. And so this is kind of how I would walk through something. I would take a look at the picture, I would determine what its undertones were, and I would kind of walk up. I keep this little like jar on my desk full of these little scrap pieces of paper so that I can kind of arrive and I sneak up on colors so I can get the correct undertones. I'm going to bring some of this yellow ochre into this brown now. Let's go with a little bit more of this purple. We're getting to some more rich colors here. And again, there's a chance that your set, you might need to use multiple coats to really achieve a nice dark skin tone. So this would be a darker skin tone that has more kind of blue undertones. Ooh, nope. I think I've got too much blue in my brush. Too far. Let's do a do-over. I mean, I don't know, that could be a skin tone, but that seemed like that was too blue or too kind of zombie-esque. So let's bring that back a little bit. I feel like I just had some blue in my brush. Yeah, there we go. That's a little better. It's still kind of more towards the zombie, but it's not blue. And time, let's bring in some more of that red. See how with minor adjustments, we get very, very different colors. Again, I'm going to bring in some more of that green. Oh, I washed my brush, I need to dry it again, because we're trying to add in more and more pigment as we go through. And this one might be a little bit too green. Yeah, it's a little too green for what I was trying to achieve, so let's bring in a little more of that red. Maybe a little bit of this blue instead. More red. And look how many different types of skin tones we are able to represent just by mixing through a few different colors. I did not need to reach into every single color that's in here. I can keep going with this too. Do you guys want me to keep going until we get even darker? Yeah, and people have, just notice when you're looking at skin tones to paint them, look for colors that you don't expect to be there. I mean, even like when you're looking at, hands are a little bit different because you can literally see veins and things like that, but you can definitely see pinks, purples, greens, blues, all through the skin on my hands. And everybody's going to have slightly different undertones depending on their actual color of skin. All right, let's keep going. Let's move over to another page. I'm going to try to figure out how not to get these to smudge. There we go. All right, so we've got kind of a purpley brown color. Let's bring this a little bit. This is a really warm brown, so I'm going to cool it down. And this one's going to be very dark, as far as kind of grayish almost undertones. This is, I think this is a little bit too although, I don't know. When you look at a reference photo, the colors are going to surprise you. I'm just imagining possible skin tones. I have like 3 different images in my head that are beautiful, like side profile images where they're lit with like really bright lights and there's a lot of contrast. So I'm thinking of like warmer tones, but I don't have a reference photo in front of me. So this could be a skin tone very well. We can mess with adding a little bit of this orange. Let's try to add in just a little bit of blue so we can kind of find an in-between, because I added too much, I think, the last time. Well, for what I'm envisioning. Again, your reference photo is going to dictate this more. Let's see. What happens if we add in a little bit of this yellow? So at this point, what is happening, and I want people to be aware of this because this is not as dark as you can paint skin tones, but we are reaching the point of like the total saturation level of being able to pack pigment and water into a mixture and then put it on the paper. And in general, when you're painting with skin tones, even on lighter skin tones, more than likely it's going to be ideal to put multiple layers on anyways. So this is kind of the same thing. And as watercolors dry, they're going to lighten. So you might think, okay, I've got the color that I wanted. But it might, when you come back to it a few minutes later, be a lot lighter than you remember. And so something like layering is going to be super helpful. I'm just going to try to make sure I'm going to put some purple and some orange in here. And this is still a teeny bit wet, but once it is dry, we can layer on top of it and we can get more saturation. And then once this is dry, we can do the same thing again. And that's probably how you're going to work anyway. So let's just hypothetically, again, I don't paint humans that often, so this is probably not the best advice that I can give. But let's say this is the human's face. Okay, here's the face shape. More than likely what you're going to do is you're going to paint this layer first. Let this dry, and maybe you'd have some highlights kind of in here on like the cheeks and the brow, maybe on the chin. And then, well, actually probably what you do is lay down the shadows first. But in this hypothetical world where we're painting it like this, let's say we put this here because let's say there are certain areas, even though this might be a really dark skin tone, maybe some of the highlights have some of this kind of like yellow beige color to them. And then you would either come in here with your darker colors and drop them in while things are still wet, or you would come in and just kind of layer on top in the other areas. So this is not dry enough to actually demonstrate all of this, but more than likely you're going to come in with multiple layers. Or you might come in and say, like, this person really has kind of a bluish purple undertone to a lot of their skin. So I'm going to come in with the shadows first. So I'm going to shadow under their eyes, maybe their cheekbones, right under their lip and under their nose. And so your first layer of your painting might look something like this, which is also going to help bump up some of those other colors as you move through the painting. Again, you'd want it to be dry, and then you could layer something like that on top of there, and that would really kind of help demonstrate the deepness and darkness of different colors, kind of that general saturation and colors like that. Okay, was that helpful? Did I get enough of the skin tones shown, or do you want me to try to make a slightly different one? I just kind of tried to work through a bunch of different, I mean, again, we started over here, super duper pale, and then I closed this so it's gonna look kind of funny because I closed it in parts were dry, and then we moved through some different colors. Notice that these have changed a little bit too because they dried a little bit. And then finally moving kind of on over to here, and then also demonstrating that you might need to, with darker skin tones, do some layering because your pigments are only going to get you so far when you actually have to put enough water in them to put them on the page. So you might want to make sure that you are utilizing layering on dry layers. Okay. All right. I think we're going to call that good for now. If you need this, I did something similar to this. I've got a couple references on my website where I have links to a couple of my YouTube videos where I talk about color mixing. So if after this you're like, oh, I wish I want to do that again, I've already got some videos on that for you. So you can go ahead and kind of reference that and play around with that more. I should probably also relook at that to make sure it's still up to date, but I only did that like within the last year. Is there anything anybody else would like to see with watercolors, or not with watercolors, but about color right now? I've got a few more minutes. This does look like Iron Man a little bit. Ooh, it's kind of creeping me out. The background is making it look like it has an eyeball too. Okay, white flowers. This is, so you're talking about like daisies and things like that. These are kind of tricky when you're thinking about colors, because white flowers, you could either start with a background and then just avoid all the petals. But usually what I would do for something like a daisy, it's been a long time since I've done this, but if memory serves me right, I would make something kind of like a Payne's gray, maybe with a little bit of this. I'm just moving kind of over to this with our little mixing well. Maybe with the addition of a little purple and then some of that orange. I want to make a really, really light gray color, super duper duper light. And then I would add in kind of like a daisy kind of a thing. And this is going to be super light. A lot of this is going to be kind of avoiding certain areas. You'd want to then paint your background, you know, a nice vibrant color. But that gray can also work for the daisies. Or I guess maybe I'm thinking coneflower daisy. I don't know. This is what I've painted with those before, something like that. And then you can fill in the gaps. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple of these questions real quick. Do I clean my palette? Not always. I'm kind of a messy painter. Exhibit A. Exhibit B. But let's say, so I did get quite a bit of blue in this red color. If you do like to just keep up on kind of keeping these kind of similar, I would just take a wet brush and just scrub it there, and that'll take off the extra color that I kind of dipped into there. And if you do that while things are still kind of wet, that'll work. Best colors for glazing. This is going to be, colors for glazing are great for adding like an atmosphere, or again, shadows, color tones, that kind of a thing. I like to glaze with things like yellows that are going to really warm things up and brighten certain areas. I would use like a medium yellow for that, but you can glaze with any color you want to. You could also cast shadow glazing with blues and things like that. Can you make gold or silver? You can make kind of a golden-esque color, which would just be, this is more like a golden rod. It would be something like yellow with a little orange in it. But you're not going to actually get any sort of shine to it, maybe a little bit. Gold actually kind of has like a very slight green undertone to it. This would be kind of a golden color, what I would describe as like a golden color, but it's not going to obviously have any sort of shimmer. And silver you would want to do kind of just a lighter gray, add more water to it. Watercolors. Okay, here's what I'm going to challenge if anybody likes homework, this isn't really anything, but I'm going to challenge you to do the same exercise for the skin tone colors as I did, but do it for water. Start with light blues, add in more greens, add in more areas where it's more gray, add in areas where it's lighter, add in areas where it leans a little bit more towards kind of almost like a muddy color or a brownish color. Move through that and see how many different possible colors you can get with kind of, watercolors are going to depend so much based on where you are. I mean, certain areas you're going to have something like this phthalo blue, and then I'm going to put a little of this like teal color in there. If you're in the Caribbean, you're going to have a super duper bright kind of a color. But even within that, you're probably going to end up needing to add a little yellow, because there are certain areas within that that are going to kind of, as they get closer to the shoreline, be a little bit more yellow. And then, yeah, if you're thinking about river water, somebody said river water, that's where you're going to want to add in a little bit of that complement color, because you're going to get some real mud, you know? Real mud, real muck. Maybe add a little more green to that. I know that doesn't look that great, but if you actually take a look at like all the different areas in a picture of a river, you're going to get a whole bunch of variation. A lot of blues, you're going to get grays, you're going to get some of that green color. All right, so this is a question I get a lot about how much water do I add to my brush, and I just want to show you one thing. So what I usually do when I'm, so look at, because I've mixed so many different colors, this is the color of my water. I have a very neutral gray color. So if I were washing my brush, it's going to put some water in there, and then usually what I will do is I will kind of wipe my brush off like this, because I'm getting any excess drops, but there's still a decent amount of water in my brush, so I'm not completely drying it off. What I looked for when I first started was I would hold my brush up and I would let it drip 1 to 2 times depending on the brush, or I would kind of just rest it on the side and a little bit of that extra would come out, and that was about how much I wanted, and then I might clean up these extra drips. it's also going to depend. If anybody was on kind of the chaotic video the other day where Andrea and I painted birds together, but you'll notice she paints with a lot more water than I do. So you might have a different comfort level with the amounts of water that you use when you're painting with watercolor. The river in your town is gross looking. Yeah, one thing I can also suggest you do, you can do this with like Adobe Color has this, or if you have any sort of a photo editing app that can identify colors, take your reference photo and then drag that little like eyedropper tool over the different areas of it and actually isolate the individual colors. You might be surprised that even if you're looking at something that looks like it's mud brown, you might be getting a blue, you might be getting a purple, you might be getting a green, that type of thing. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have. I encourage you to play with making as many colors as you possibly can, just using a couple of them. This is not saying like you have to work in a limited color range or anything, but understanding this, when I actually sat down and really kind of started understanding the color wheel as it stands and just mixing through colors, it really helped me start to understand when I was looking at colors what to look for. And then also it gave me an idea of how many different colors there are out there. Yes, we could go out to the store and we could buy most of these colors in tubes or something like that, but not quite all of them, and we might still want to modify some of the specialty colors, things like that. I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and I'm going to talk to, yeah, I think the bird one, I think I did put the bird one up on my YouTube. But yeah, I'm going to talk to Andrea. We might be doing another live before the month ends. I don't know if not. We haven't actually talked about it today. I think she's at the market right now. But stay tuned. We may have another live coming up soon. Yes, patience is a big part of it, and that's why I use the hairdryer or the heat gun a lot. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me today, and I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day.